You ever looked at someone who built extraordinary wealth and wondered, how did they get so far ahead? Maybe you assumed they earned far more money than everyone else. Maybe you believed they were simply luckier. Or perhaps they were born into opportunities that never came your way. But what if none of those explanations were the real answer? What if one of the greatest financial tools in history has been hiding in plain sight, misunderstood by millions, feared by almost everyone, yet quietly mastered by those who build fortunes? For many people, the word loan immediately triggers anxiety. They picture unpaid bills, collection calls, credit card balances that seem impossible to escape, stories of families losing their homes, businesses collapsing under debt, years spent working only to pay interest. It is no surprise that so many people grow up believing one simple idea: debt is dangerous. Stay away from it. That advice sounds responsible. It sounds safe. And in many situations, it is. But there is another side to the story that very few people are taught. Throughout history, some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, investors, and business owners have borrowed enormous amounts of money. Not because they were desperate, not because they lacked discipline, but because they understood something that most people never learn. They knew the difference between borrowing to consume and borrowing to create. That single distinction has separated financial freedom from financial struggle for generations. Think about it for a moment. A family takes out a loan to buy an expensive luxury car. Every month, the car loses value. Insurance costs continue. Maintenance expenses grow. Yet the loan payment never disappears. The debt demands money, while the asset quietly becomes worth less. Now imagine another person. They borrow the same amount of money, but instead of purchasing something that drains their income, they acquire an asset that produces income every single month. Perhaps it is a rental property. Perhaps it is equipment that expands a profitable business. Perhaps it is an investment that generates reliable cash flow. In one situation, debt takes money away. In the other, debt helps create more money than it costs. The loan itself did not determine the outcome. The decision did. That is why debt should never be viewed as either a hero or a villain. It is simply a tool. Just like a hammer can build a beautiful home or break a window, a loan can either strengthen your financial future or quietly destroy it. Everything depends on the knowledge, discipline, and intention of the person holding it. Unfortunately, most schools never teach us how borrowing actually works. We learn how to memorize formulas. We learn history. We learn science. Yet almost no one explains how banks think, how leverage creates wealth, why some debt makes investors richer, or why other debt traps families for decades. As a result, millions of hardworking people spend their lives avoiding opportunities because they fear borrowing. Others borrow recklessly, believing that easy access to credit means they can afford a lifestyle they have not yet earned. Both groups make the same mistake. They misunderstand the purpose of debt. This audiobook is not about encouraging you to borrow more. It is about teaching you to borrow smarter. You will discover why successful investors think differently about loans, why cash flow matters more than appearances, why leverage can become one of the greatest wealth-building tools ever created when used with discipline. And just as importantly, you will learn the costly mistakes that destroy financial futures long before people realize what is happening. By the end of this journey, you will never look at a loan in the same way again. Because the wealthiest people rarely ask, "How much can I borrow?" Instead, they ask a far more powerful question: how can borrowed money build an asset that eventually pays for itself? That single question has quietly built businesses, investment portfolios, real estate empires, and financial independence around the world. So as we begin, set aside everything you thought you knew about debt. Listen with an open mind, challenge your assumptions, and prepare to discover why the smartest borrowers are not the ones who owe the least. They are the ones who know exactly why they borrowed in the first place. Let's begin. Memsite, Chapter 1, Borrow to Build Assets? not to buy lifestyle. There is an old saying among experienced investors: the same dollar can either become your employee or remain your expense forever. Most people never stop to think about that. They simply see money as something to spend. The wealthy see it differently. They see every dollar as a worker that should eventually bring more dollars back. That single difference in perspective changes every financial decision they make. And nowhere is this difference more obvious than in the way they borrow money. From the time we are young, we are taught a simple lesson: stay out of debt. It sounds responsible, it sounds safe, but it is also incomplete, because debt itself is not the problem. The real question has never been, what did you borrow? The real question is, what did the borrowed money buy? That answer determines whether debt becomes a stepping stone toward wealth or an anchor that slowly pulls you underwater. Imagine two friends who each receive approval for exactly the same loan. Both borrow the same amount. Both pay the same interest rate. Both sign almost identical contracts. On paper, their financial situations appear identical. Yet 5 years later, their lives could not look more different. The first person uses the loan to purchase a luxury SUV that costs far more than they truly need. For the first few weeks, everything feels exciting. Friends admire the vehicle. Neighbors notice. Every drive feels like a reward. But slowly, something begins to change. The vehicle starts losing value almost immediately. Insurance premiums continue arriving. Fuel costs increase. Maintenance becomes more expensive each year. Meanwhile, the loan payment never stops. Every month, money leaves the owner's bank account, but nothing returns. The car consumes cash while becoming less valuable every day. Now imagine the second borrower. Instead of purchasing something that impresses strangers, they purchase something that produces income. Perhaps a small rental property. Perhaps equipment that allows a growing business to double production. Perhaps a small commercial space leased to another company. Each month, that asset begins generating cash. Part of that income pays the loan, part covers operating costs, and whatever remains belongs to the owner. The debt is still there. But now something remarkable happens. Instead of depending entirely on personal income, the asset itself begins carrying part of the financial burden. This is one of the most important financial principles you will ever learn. Good debt should eventually help pay for itself. Bad debt expects you to pay for everything, every month, for years, without giving anything back. This is why financially successful people rarely ask, "Can I afford the monthly payment?" Instead, they ask a far more intelligent question: will this purchase create more money than it costs? That single question eliminates countless bad financial decisions before they ever happen. Unfortunately, modern society encourages the opposite mindset. Advertisements rarely tell you to build assets. They tell you to upgrade. Upgrade your phone. Upgrade your wardrobe. Upgrade your car. Upgrade your lifestyle. Every commercial whispers the same message: you deserve this. Perhaps you do. But deserving something and being able to build wealth from it are two completely different conversations. The financial world is filled with people who look successful while quietly drowning in payments no one else can see. Expensive watches, luxury apartments, designer clothing, brand new cars. From the outside, everything appears perfect. Inside, every paycheck already has a destination before it even arrives. The bank, the credit card company, the finance company. The appearance of wealth often hides financial fragility. Real wealth rarely needs to announce itself. Consider how many people spend decades working harder, not because they want to, but because their lifestyle demands it. Every promotion quickly becomes a larger mortgage. Every salary increase becomes a newer vehicle. Every bonus disappears into another vacation financed by borrowed money. Their income grows, but so do their obligations. Freedom never arrives, only larger payments. This is what consumer debt quietly does. It steals tomorrow, one monthly installment at a time. The wealthy understand a completely different game. Before borrowing, they pause, they analyze, they calculate, they remove emotion from the decision. They ask questions that most people never think to ask. Will this asset appreciate? Can it generate predictable cash flow? What happens if the economy slows? Can this investment survive higher interest rates? What is my worst case scenario? Notice something important. None of these questions involve excitement. None involve status. None involve impressing other people. Every question focuses on numbers, because numbers never care about emotion. They simply reveal reality. This is why successful investing often appears boring. There are no dramatic decisions, no emotional shopping sprees, no desperate attempts to look wealthy. Instead, there is patience, discipline, calculation, and a willingness to delay immediate pleasure for long-term freedom. Think of a fruit tree. The day you plant it, there is no fruit. There is only work, watering, protecting, waiting, for months, perhaps years. It appears that nothing is happening. Then one season, the harvest begins, and year after year, the same tree continues producing fruit with very little additional effort. An income-producing asset works in much the same way. At first, it requires capital, planning, research, patience. But once established, it can continue generating income long after the original purchase has been forgotten. Consumer purchases behave very differently. Imagine buying a brand new television with borrowed money. The moment it enters your home, its resale value begins falling. 5 years later, it is worth only a small fraction of its original price. Yet for much of that time, you may still have been making loan payments. The television entertained you, but it never helped pay its own bill. Now compare that with a carefully selected rental property. Even if appreciation is modest, tenants contribute toward the mortgage every month. Over time, the loan balance decreases. The property's value may gradually increase. Rental income often rises alongside inflation, and eventually, the asset that once required financing may become completely debt-free while continuing to generate income. That is the extraordinary difference between consumption and investment. One takes money from your future. The other has the potential to build it. This principle also applies to business. Suppose a small bakery borrows money to purchase a larger commercial oven. The loan increases monthly expenses, but the new equipment allows the bakery to produce twice as many products each day. Sales increase, revenue grows, profit expands. The loan created an asset that multiplied earning capacity. Now imagine borrowing the same amount simply to renovate the waiting area with expensive furniture that produces no additional sales. The debt is identical. The outcome is completely different. Always remember, banks are willing to finance almost anything. They do not decide whether your purchase is wise. That responsibility belongs entirely to you. The bank earns interest whether you become wealthy or whether you struggle for years making payments. Your future depends on the quality of your decisions, not the availability of credit. Before signing any loan agreement, develop one simple habit. Pause. Take a sheet of paper. Write one question across the top. Will this borrowed money eventually return more money than it costs? If the honest answer is yes, continue your research. If the answer is no, walk away without regret. Many of the best financial decisions are the purchases you never make. Remember, the goal is not to avoid debt forever. The goal is to avoid debt that weakens your future, while embracing debt that has the potential to strengthen it. Because the wealthiest people do not borrow simply because money is available. They borrow because they have found an opportunity worth financing. And that single shift in thinking, from buying things to acquiring assets, may become one of the most profitable decisions of your entire financial life. Chapter 2. Borrow only what you can comfortably repay. One of the greatest financial misconceptions is believing that loan approval means affordability. It does not. A bank approving your application does not automatically mean the loan is right for you. It simply means the lender believes there is a reasonable chance they will get their money back with interest. Those are two very different things. Many borrowers celebrate the moment they hear the words, "Congratulations, you've been approved." To them, it feels like a victory, a sign of financial progress, proof that they have made it. But experienced investors often react very differently. Approval is not the finish line. It is the beginning of a far more important question. Should I actually borrow this much? That question separates disciplined investors from emotional borrowers. Imagine walking into a grocery store hungry. Everything suddenly looks appealing. Your shopping cart fills much faster than you expected. If you had entered with a list, you would probably have purchased only what you truly needed. Debt works in much the same way. Without clear financial boundaries, it becomes surprisingly easy to borrow more than is actually necessary. The lender may be willing to finance the maximum amount. Your emotions may encourage you to accept it, but your future cash flow may tell a completely different story. That is why intelligent borrowing always begins with honesty, not optimism, not wishful thinking, honesty. Before taking on any loan, sit down with your finances exactly as they are today, not as you hope they will be next year, not after the promotion you think is coming, not after the business doubles its revenue. Look only at today's reality, today's salary, today's expenses, today's obligations, today's savings. Because those numbers, not tomorrow's dreams, will determine whether the loan becomes an opportunity or a burden. One of the most common mistakes borrowers make is building financial plans around expectations rather than evidence. Someone says, business is growing. I'll easily earn twice as much next year. Another believes, I'm almost certain I'll receive a raise in a few months. Someone else assumes, property prices always go up. Maybe they are right. Maybe they are wrong. The problem is not optimism itself. The problem is borrowing as though optimism were guaranteed. Financial success is built on preparation, not prediction. Think about a bridge. Engineers never design a bridge strong enough to support only the average amount of traffic. They build it to withstand storms, heavy trucks, unexpected stress, years of continuous use. Why? Because real life is unpredictable. Your financial life deserves the same level of planning. When you calculate whether you can afford a loan, do not ask whether you can make the payment during your best month. Ask whether you could still make it during one of your most difficult months. Suppose your income unexpectedly falls by 20%. Could you still make the payment? What if your car suddenly needs major repairs? What if your business experiences several slow months? What if medical expenses appear without warning? If a single unexpected event completely destroys your repayment plan, the loan is probably too large. Many wealthy investors live by a simple philosophy. They always leave room to breathe. They understand that survival often matters more than maximizing returns. Imagine two real estate investors. The first uses every dollar available to purchase the largest property the bank will finance. His monthly cash flow becomes razor thin. Every unexpected expense creates panic. The second investor purchases a slightly smaller property. The monthly profit is lower. But there is breathing room. Vacancies become manageable. Repairs do not create financial emergencies. Interest rate fluctuations become less threatening. Who is more likely to survive the next economic downturn? Almost always, the investor who left margin for error. Because wealth is rarely destroyed by one enormous mistake. It is usually destroyed by many small pressures arriving at exactly the wrong time. This is why experienced investors value financial resilience more than financial excitement. They would rather grow a little slower than risk losing everything by growing too aggressively. Another principle worth remembering is that cash flow matters more than appearances. Some borrowers focus entirely on the size of the loan. Professionals focus on the monthly obligation. $1 million loan with strong positive cash flow may be far safer than a much smaller loan that constantly drains your income. The number itself is not the problem. The payment is, the pressure is, the sustainability is. One useful exercise is to perform what investors call a stress test. Pretend several things go wrong simultaneously. Your income decreases, interest rates rise slightly, an unexpected repair appears. Could you still continue making every payment without borrowing even more money? If the answer is yes, your financial foundation is probably solid. If the answer is no, the loan deserves another look. Stress testing may seem pessimistic. In reality, it is one of the most optimistic habits you can develop because it prepares you to survive situations that cause others to fail. There is another mistake that quietly traps many borrowers: confusing borrowing capacity with purchasing power. Just because someone is willing to lend you money does not mean your financial position has actually improved. Credit creates access. It does not create wealth. Only productive use of that credit creates wealth. This distinction is incredibly important. Banks earn money by lending. It is their business. Their approval process is designed to estimate risk, not to help you achieve financial freedom. Their interests and your interests overlap, but they are not identical. The bank wants repayment. You want independence. Those goals only align when the loan genuinely improves your financial future. Perhaps the greatest habit of financially successful people is learning to say no, even when they technically qualify. They understand that discipline is often invisible. Nobody congratulates you for declining a loan. Nobody applauds the purchase you never made. Nobody notices the luxury home you decided not to buy. But years later, those invisible decisions often become the foundation of visible wealth. Warren Buffett once remarked that successful people become successful partly because they say no to almost everything. The same principle applies to borrowing. Every loan you decline leaves capacity for a better opportunity later. Every unnecessary payment you avoid creates flexibility. Every dollar of interest you never owe becomes another dollar available for investing. Remember, your future self is the one who must live with today's financial decisions. That person deserves more than optimism. They deserve preparation. They deserve caution. They deserve breathing room, because the smartest borrowers are not those who qualify for the biggest loans. They are the ones who borrow only what they can comfortably repay, even when life refuses to go according to plan. Chapter 3. Master the power of leverage before you ever use it. If there is one concept that separates ordinary savers from extraordinary wealth builders, it is leverage. Few financial ideas are more misunderstood, and few have created more fortunes. At first glance, leverage appears almost magical. It allows someone with limited capital to control assets worth many times more than they could ever purchase with cash alone. But that is exactly why it deserves respect, because anything powerful enough to multiply your success is also powerful enough to multiply your mistakes. Many people spend their entire lives believing that the safest financial strategy is simple: save your money, pay cash for everything, avoid borrowing at all costs. That advice sounds logical. It feels responsible, and for certain purchases, it absolutely is. But if every successful entrepreneur, commercial real estate investor, and business owner followed that rule exclusively, many of today's largest companies would never have existed. The truth is, wealth has rarely been built using only personal savings. It has been built by combining capital, opportunity, and intelligent leverage. Think about a construction company. Imagine one worker carrying bricks one at a time. Now imagine another worker operating a crane capable of lifting several tons with a single movement. Both are working. Both are building, but one is operating on an entirely different level of efficiency. Leverage functions like that crane. It does not replace hard work. It multiplies what hard work can accomplish. Without leverage, your financial growth is usually limited by one thing: the amount of money you personally own. With leverage, your opportunities expand beyond your current savings. Instead of waiting 20 years to accumulate enough cash, you gain the ability to control productive assets much sooner. That is one reason successful investors often say, ownership matters less than control. You do not always need to own 100% of an asset with cash. Sometimes, controlling that asset through carefully managed financing creates a far greater long-term return. Imagine two investors beginning with exactly the same amount of money. Each has $100,000 available. The first investor believes borrowing is dangerous, so they purchase one property worth exactly $100,000. No debt, no monthly loan payment. Everything is paid in full. It feels safe. The second investor thinks differently. Instead of purchasing one property outright, they use that same $100,000 as down payments on several carefully selected rental properties. The bank finances the remaining balance. At first, many people immediately focus on the debt, but experienced investors focus somewhere else. They focus on control. The first investor owns one asset. The second controls several. Now imagine property values increase over time. Perhaps rents rise. Perhaps demand strengthens. Suddenly, each property begins appreciating. Each tenant contributes toward paying the mortgage. Each month, equity quietly increases. The investor is not simply building wealth with personal savings anymore. They are allowing borrowed capital to participate in the process. This is the true purpose of leverage. Not borrowing for the sake of borrowing, but accelerating ownership of productive assets. Of course, there is something many beginners fail to understand. Leverage does not create profit by itself. The asset must still perform. This is where mathematics replaces emotion. Suppose you borrow money at an annual interest rate of 5%. If the investment produces only 4%, you are losing money. The numbers simply do not work. But if the investment consistently generates 8, 10, or even 12%, the spread between borrowing costs and investment returns becomes your opportunity. That difference, often called the spread, is one of the most important numbers every investor should calculate before signing any loan agreement. Successful investors never ask, "Can I get approved?" They ask, "Will this spread remain positive under realistic conditions?" Notice the wording. Not perfect conditions, realistic conditions. What happens if maintenance costs increase? What happens if occupancy falls temporarily? What happens if interest rates rise in the future? What happens if repairs become more expensive? Great investors ask difficult questions before investing, so they do not receive difficult surprises afterward. There is another remarkable advantage to intelligent leverage that many people overlook. Inflation. Most people think inflation only makes life more expensive. Groceries cost more. Fuel costs more. Housing becomes more expensive. While all of that is true, inflation also changes the value of debt. Imagine you secure a 30-year fixed-rate loan today. Your monthly payment remains largely unchanged, but over the next several decades, wages often rise. Rental income frequently rises. Property values may increase. Yet, your original loan payment remains based on yesterday's dollars. Little by little, inflation reduces the real burden of fixed debt. In other words, you gradually repay yesterday's loan using tomorrow's less valuable currency. Meanwhile, if the underlying asset continues appreciating, your equity expands from both directions. The debt slowly becomes smaller in real terms, while the asset becomes more valuable. This is one reason long-term investors often prefer fixed-rate financing. They understand that time, when combined with productive assets, can become an incredibly powerful partner. However, never confuse leverage with guaranteed success. A magnifying glass enlarges everything placed beneath it. Success or failure. The same principle applies here. Imagine purchasing an investment property with only a small down payment. If the property's value rises significantly, your return on invested capital can be extraordinary. But if the property's value falls sharply, your losses become larger as well. Leverage never asks whether you made a good decision. It simply amplifies whatever decision you already made. That is why research always comes before financing, not after. Smart investors spend far more time evaluating opportunities than negotiating loans. They inspect neighborhoods, study financial statements, analyze demand, estimate maintenance costs, review local market trends, calculate vacancy risks. Then, only after convincing themselves the investment is fundamentally sound, do they consider borrowing. The loan is never the investment. The asset is. The financing simply helps acquire it. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about leverage is believing it is reserved only for the wealthy. In reality, many wealthy people became wealthy because they learned how to use leverage responsibly long before they became rich. They started with one property, one business, one opportunity, one carefully calculated decision. Over time, those decisions compounded. Each successful investment created additional cash flow. Additional cash flow created new opportunities. New opportunities created more assets. Eventually, their wealth appeared enormous, but it rarely happened overnight. It happened because leverage allowed time and disciplined investing to work together. Always remember, borrowing money should never make you feel powerful. Owning productive assets should. The loan itself is only a bridge. The destination is cash flow, financial independence, and eventually, a life where your investments begin producing more income than your own labor. That is the true power of leverage. Not borrowing more money, but making every borrowed dollar work harder than you ever could alone. Chapter 4. Turn every income increase into an investment in your freedom. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that earning more money automatically leads to becoming wealthier. It does not. If that were true, every person with a high salary would eventually become financially independent. Yet reality tells a different story. There are doctors earning hundreds of thousands every year who still live paycheck to paycheck. Business owners with impressive revenue who constantly struggle with cash flow. Professionals driving luxury cars, living in beautiful homes, yet carrying enormous debts that quietly consume their future. At the same time, there are ordinary investors with much smaller incomes who steadily build wealth year after year. The difference is rarely income. The difference is what happens after income arrives. Imagine receiving a promotion at work. Your employer rewards your dedication with a higher salary. For a brief moment, your financial life changes. You now have more money flowing into your account every month. At that exact moment, two different futures become possible. The first future is the one most people choose. Almost immediately, their lifestyle begins expanding. A larger apartment suddenly feels reasonable. A newer car seems affordable. Weekend dinners become more expensive. Vacations become more luxurious. Monthly subscriptions quietly multiply. Nothing seems excessive on its own. Each purchase feels justified. I've worked hard. I deserve this. It's only a little more each month. But something dangerous is happening beneath the surface. Every increase in income is matched by an increase in spending. A year later, despite earning significantly more than before, they somehow feel no richer. Their paycheck has grown. Their financial freedom has not. This silent phenomenon has a name: lifestyle inflation. It is one of the greatest enemies of long-term wealth because it convinces people they are progressing while quietly keeping them exactly where they started. Now imagine a second person receiving the very same promotion. Their salary increases by exactly the same amount, but instead of upgrading their lifestyle, they upgrade their balance sheet. The additional income never becomes part of everyday spending. Instead, it is directed toward reducing debt. Every extra dollar attacks the loan principal, not the interest, the principal. At first, the progress appears slow. The loan balance moves only a little. Nothing dramatic happens. Friends notice no difference. Neighbors see no new purchases. Social media remains quiet. It almost feels as though nothing has changed, but mathematics tells a completely different story. Most borrowers never fully understand how loan amortization works. In the early years of a mortgage or business loan, a surprisingly large portion of every monthly payment goes toward interest. Very little actually reduces the amount you owe. The bank collects its profit first. Only afterward does your ownership begin increasing. This is why additional principal payments are so powerful. Every extra payment does far more than reduce today's balance. It eliminates years of future interest that would otherwise continue accumulating. Think of it like removing the first domino from a very long line. Once that domino disappears, every domino behind it eventually disappears as well. That single extra payment quietly changes the entire future of the loan. Suppose your monthly mortgage payment is fixed. Then one year, You receive an annual bonus. Many people immediately begin planning how to spend it. A vacation, a designer watch, home renovations. The purchases create excitement, but only temporarily. Several months later, the excitement fades. The debt remains exactly where it was. Now imagine directing that same bonus toward the mortgage principal. Nothing glamorous happens overnight. No one congratulates you. No photographs appear online. But something extraordinary begins happening inside your financial future. The loan shortens, interest costs decline, equity grows faster. Freedom arrives sooner. One decision creates temporary memories. The other creates permanent financial progress. Experienced investors understand something that consumers often overlook. Every dollar has an opportunity cost. If you spend $1 today, that dollar can no longer reduce debt. It can no longer earn investment returns. It can no longer create future cash flow. Money is always working somewhere. The only question is, who is it working for? Is it helping you become wealthier, or is it helping someone else sell another product? Consider two neighbors. Both receive a salary increase of exactly the same amount. One immediately purchases a more expensive vehicle. The other continues driving the same reliable car while directing every extra dollar toward debt reduction. 5 years later, the first neighbor owns a vehicle worth far less than its purchase price. The second neighbor owns dramatically more equity in appreciating assets. From the outside, the first neighbor appeared more successful. From the inside, the second neighbor quietly became wealthier. Real wealth often grows silently. There is another benefit to accelerated debt repayment that cannot easily be measured with numbers: peace of mind. Debt is not only a financial obligation, it is also a psychological burden. Every monthly payment occupies mental space. Every outstanding balance quietly influences your decisions. Some people stay in careers they dislike because the payments leave them no alternative. Others postpone starting businesses, moving to a new city, or spending more time with family, simply because debt limits their choices. Every principal payment buys back a small piece of your freedom, not just financially, emotionally, mentally, professionally. One day, almost without realizing it, the loan disappears. Suddenly, the money that once flowed to the bank every month belongs entirely to you. Now imagine something even more powerful. Instead of increasing your lifestyle after paying off the loan, you continue living exactly the same way. But this time, the former loan payment is redirected into investments, index funds, rental properties, business expansion, dividend-producing assets. The discipline that once eliminated debt now begins creating wealth. This is where many financially successful people experience exponential growth, because the habit never changed. Only the destination of the money changed. Before, it reduced liabilities. Now, it acquires assets. This transition is one of the most important turning points in a person's financial life. Remember, banks hope borrowers make only the minimum payment. Longer repayment periods generate more interest. More interest creates more profit for the lender. Your objective should be exactly the opposite. Reduce the principal whenever possible. Shorten the repayment period whenever practical. Minimize the total interest paid over the life of the loan. Every month removed from your repayment schedule represents another month your money remains in your own hands instead of someone else's. Perhaps the greatest lesson in this chapter is surprisingly simple. When your income grows, do not immediately expand your lifestyle. Expand your freedom first, because luxury purchased with borrowed money fades remarkably quickly. Financial freedom purchased through discipline lasts a lifetime. The wealthiest people are not always those who earn the highest incomes. More often, they are the people who consistently redirected today's success toward tomorrow's independence. And that journey usually begins with one simple habit: using every increase in income to strengthen your future before improving your lifestyle. Chapter 5. Understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. Not all debt deserves the same reputation, yet most people speak about debt as though it were one single thing. Debt is dangerous. Debt should always be avoided. If you borrow money, you're making a mistake. These statements sound convincing, but they ignore one critical truth. Debt is not defined by the fact that you borrowed. It is defined by what the borrowed money allows you to accomplish. That distinction changes everything. Imagine handing two people exactly the same amount of money. The first person spends it on a luxury vacation. For one unforgettable week, they enjoy beautiful beaches, luxury hotels, fine restaurants. The memories are real. The experience is valuable. But when the vacation ends, the money is gone. If it was financed through debt, the payments remain long after the memories begin to fade. Now imagine giving that same amount of money to someone else. Instead of purchasing an experience, they acquire equipment that doubles the productivity of their small business. Within months, their income begins increasing. New customers arrive. Revenue grows. The equipment eventually pays for itself. Years later, it may still be generating profit. The amount borrowed was identical. The outcome could not be more different. This is the simplest way to understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. Good debt creates value. Bad debt consumes value. Good debt increases your ability to earn. Bad debt increases your obligation to spend. That is why successful investors rarely judge debt by emotion. They judge by mathematics. Every loan should answer one simple question. Will this borrowing improve my financial position over time? If the answer is yes, the debt deserves further consideration. If the answer is no, the excitement of the purchase should never outweigh the reality of the numbers. Many people confuse expensive possessions with valuable assets. They are not the same. An expensive object is simply something that costs a lot. An asset is something that contributes positively to your financial life. A luxury car may cost more than a rental property, yet one continuously loses value, while the other may produce income every month. Price and value are not identical. Understanding that difference protects you from countless poor financial decisions. Consider a young entrepreneur launching a small business. They borrow money to purchase professional equipment that immediately allows them to serve more customers. Every project completed generates additional income. Every satisfied client increases future opportunities. The loan becomes part of a system that produces wealth. Now imagine someone else borrowing the same amount to purchase designer clothing intended mainly to impress strangers. The clothing may create confidence. It may even attract compliments, but it rarely produces enough financial return to repay the debt. One purchase expands earning potential. The other expands monthly obligations. That is why the purpose behind borrowing matters more than the borrowing itself. Good debt often possesses three important characteristics. First, it helps generate income. Second, it has the potential to appreciate or maintain value. Third, it improves your long-term financial position rather than weakening it. Notice that none of those characteristics mention appearance, prestige, or social status, because banks cannot be repaid with admiration. They are repaid with cash flow. Bad debt usually follows a very different pattern. It finances things that decline in value. It supports temporary pleasure, and it requires future income without creating additional earning power. The borrower works harder, while the purchase quietly becomes worth less every year. That is a difficult cycle to escape. There is another subtle danger hidden inside bad debt. It often arrives disguised as convenience. Credit cards make purchasing effortless. Buy now, pay later. Monthly installments appear surprisingly affordable. Instead of asking, "Can I truly afford this?" people begin asking, "Can I afford this payment?" Those are completely different questions. A small monthly payment rarely feels threatening, but dozens of small monthly payments combined together can quietly consume an entire paycheck. This is how financial pressure slowly develops, rarely through one catastrophic decision. More often through many comfortable decisions repeated over time. Good debt, on the other hand, usually requires patience, research, planning, analysis. There is very little excitement involved. Successful investors may spend weeks evaluating one property, months studying a business opportunity, hours reviewing financial statements. From the outside, it appears slow. Inside, it is incredibly deliberate, because every loan they accept must justify itself through future returns. Think about a farmer planting seeds. The farmer spends money today, not because today's field looks more impressive, but because tomorrow's harvest depends on today's preparation. Good debt works in much the same way. It sacrifices some comfort in the present to create greater abundance in the future. Bad debt often reverses that equation. It purchases comfort today while sacrificing tomorrow's financial freedom. This explains why two people earning exactly the same income can experience completely different financial lives. One consistently acquires liabilities, the other consistently acquires productive assets. After several years, their incomes may still be similar, but their balance sheets tell completely different stories. One owns possessions that require constant spending. The other owns investments that generate additional income, eventually. Those investments begin purchasing new investments. That is how wealth compounds, not through spending, but through ownership. Another useful habit is learning to separate emotion from borrowing decisions. Whenever you feel excited about taking on debt, pause. Ask yourself, would I still borrow this money if nobody else ever saw what I purchased? That single question removes an incredible amount of emotional spending. If the answer becomes uncertain, the purchase probably deserves more thought. If the investment still makes financial sense without public recognition, you may be looking at something genuinely valuable. The wealthiest people often understand a simple principle that many others overlook. Debt itself is neither good nor bad. It is neutral. Just like fire. Fire can cook food, heat a home, power entire industries. But handled carelessly, it can destroy everything in its path. Debt behaves exactly the same way. Used with knowledge, it becomes an extraordinary financial tool. Used carelessly, it quietly becomes a long-term burden. So before accepting any loan, stop thinking about whether borrowing is good or bad. Instead, ask a far better question. Will this debt help build the life I want, or will it simply finance the lifestyle I want today? Because the answer to that single question will often determine whether debt becomes your greatest financial ally or your most expensive mistake. Chapter 6. Protect yourself with cash flow before you borrow. One of the greatest myths about borrowing is that income is what keeps you financially safe. It is not. Income helps. A high salary certainly creates opportunities. A successful business can generate impressive revenue, but income alone has never guaranteed financial security. What truly protects borrowers, especially during difficult times, is cash flow. Many people confuse these two ideas. They assume they are the same. They are not. Income is the money you earn. Cash flow is the money that remains available after all your obligations have been paid. That difference may seem small. In reality, it can determine whether a borrower survives an economic downturn or loses everything they have worked so hard to build. Imagine two professionals. Each earns exactly the same annual income. Each appears equally successful from the outside. Both drive nice vehicles. Both live in attractive homes. Both seem financially comfortable. Yet beneath the surface, their situations are completely different. The first person spends nearly every dollar they earn. Mortgage payments, car loans, credit cards, luxury subscriptions, private memberships, dining out, vacations. By the end of each month, almost nothing remains. Their income is impressive. Their cash flow is almost non-existent. The second person earns the same amount, but structures life differently. They live below their means. They avoid unnecessary monthly obligations. Their investments generate additional income. And after every expense is paid, money is still left over. That remaining money becomes their financial breathing room. Now imagine an unexpected recession. One company begins reducing staff. Business slows. Bonuses disappear. Suddenly, both individuals experience a temporary decline in income. Who experiences immediate panic? Usually the one who depended entirely on every paycheck, because every payment continues arriving, even when income slows. The mortgage still expects payment. The bank still expects payment. The credit card company still expects payment. Debt never takes a vacation simply because life becomes difficult. The second borrower faces the same economic challenges, but their cash flow provides options. Emergency savings cover temporary setbacks. Investment income continues arriving. Monthly obligations remain manageable. Stress still exists, but survival is never immediately threatened. This is why experienced investors constantly focus on one question. If my income stopped tomorrow, how long could I continue meeting every financial obligation? That answer reveals far more about financial health than annual salary ever could. Cash flow is not simply about having extra money. It is about buying time. Time to recover, time to adapt, time to make thoughtful decisions instead of desperate ones. Many financial disasters happen not because people made terrible investments, but because they ran out of time. Imagine owning an excellent rental property. The neighborhood remains strong. The long-term outlook is positive. But suddenly, the property sits vacant for several months. Repairs become necessary. Unexpected maintenance costs appear. If your financial plan depended on every dollar arriving exactly on schedule, the pressure becomes overwhelming. You may be forced to sell a perfectly good investment, not because it was a poor asset, but because your cash flow could not support a temporary interruption. This happens far more often than most people realize. Strong assets are frequently sold by financially weak owners, not because the investment failed, because the owner's cash flow failed. That distinction is incredibly important. Successful investors prepare for uncertainty before uncertainty arrives. They assume that something will eventually go wrong, not because they are pessimistic, because they are realistic. A roof will eventually need replacing. Equipment will eventually wear out. Markets will eventually slow. Unexpected expenses will eventually appear. Planning for those moments is not negativity. It is wisdom. Think about a ship crossing the ocean. The captain never assumes the sea will remain perfectly calm. Extra fuel is carried. Emergency equipment is inspected. Life rafts are prepared. Navigation systems have backups. Why? Because preparation creates confidence. Borrowing should follow exactly the same philosophy. Before taking on debt, ask yourself several important questions. If interest rates increase, can I still comfortably make every payment? If my income temporarily declines, will my cash flow remain positive? If an emergency expense appears next month, will I need to borrow even more money just to survive? These questions may seem cautious. That is precisely the point. Caution is often the invisible partner of long-term success. There is another lesson many investors eventually discover. Revenue does not pay bills. Cash flow does. A business can generate millions in annual sales, yet still fail because money arrives too slowly while expenses arrive immediately. Individuals experience the same problem. Someone may earn an impressive salary, yet constantly feel financially trapped because every dollar has already been promised to someone else. Cash flow restores flexibility. Flexibility creates resilience. Resilience creates longevity, and longevity allows compounding to perform its quiet magic. The wealthiest investors understand something simple but profound. The goal is not merely to own assets. The goal is to own assets that consistently produce positive cash flow. An apartment building that pays you every month, a business that generates reliable profit, dividend-producing investments, royalties, licensing income. These streams gradually reduce dependence on earned income. Over time, they transform work from necessity into choice. Perhaps that is the greatest purpose of intelligent borrowing. Not simply acquiring more assets, but acquiring assets capable of producing dependable cash flow. Because cash flow changes everything. It pays your obligations. It creates financial stability. It funds future investments. And perhaps most importantly, it allows you to sleep peacefully, knowing that your financial future is not balanced on a single paycheck. Always remember, borrowing should never leave you hoping everything goes perfectly. It should leave you prepared, even when life refuses to cooperate. Because successful borrowers do not build financial plans for perfect conditions. They build financial systems strong enough to survive imperfect ones. And in the world of wealth creation, that difference often separates those who merely earn money from those who achieve lasting financial freedom. Chapter 7. Build a borrower profile that banks trust. Most people believe that borrowing money begins the day they walk into a bank. It doesn't. In reality, your ability to borrow is being built long before you ever fill out an application. Every financial decision you make, every bill you pay, every commitment you keep is quietly creating a reputation that lenders study very carefully. Many borrowers imagine that banks lend money simply because someone has a good idea. But banks don't invest in ideas. They invest in probability. Their business depends on one simple question. What are the chances this borrower will repay us exactly as promised? Everything they evaluate is designed to answer that question. Imagine that two people apply for exactly the same loan. Both earn similar incomes. Both want to purchase similar investment properties. Both request the same amount of financing. At first glance, they appear almost identical. But after reviewing their financial history, the lender quickly notices important differences. The first applicant has consistently paid bills on time. Credit balances remain low. Savings have been growing steadily for years. Employment has been stable. Previous loans were repaid exactly as agreed. Nothing about their financial life appears dramatic, but everything appears dependable. The second applicant tells an exciting story. Big future plans, large expected profits, rapid business growth. Yet their financial history tells another story. Late payments, frequent borrowing, high credit card balances, little emergency savings, income that changes dramatically from month to month. The vision may be inspiring, but the numbers create uncertainty. Which borrower is more likely to receive favorable loan terms? The answer is obvious. Because lenders are not rewarded for believing optimistic stories. They are rewarded for minimizing risk. This teaches us one of the most valuable financial lessons of all. Trust is a financial asset. It cannot be touched. It cannot be photographed. But it can save you thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, over the lifetime of a loan. A borrower with strong financial credibility often receives lower interest rates. Lower interest rates reduce monthly payments. Lower payments improve cash flow. Better cash flow creates additional investment opportunities. One good financial habit quietly leads to another. Many people spend years trying to earn more money while ignoring something equally important. Becoming someone that financial institutions genuinely trust. That trust is built slowly, payment by payment, month after month, year after year. It is remarkably similar to building a personal reputation. Imagine two contractors. One consistently arrives on time, finishes projects as promised, communicates honestly, keeps every commitment. The other occasionally disappears, misses deadlines, offers excuses, promises more than they deliver. Even if both possess similar skills, which one receives more referrals? The reliable one. Money follows trust. The banking world works exactly the same way. Reliability creates opportunity. There is another reason your borrower profile matters. The cost of borrowing is rarely fixed forever. A stronger financial profile often allows you to refinance existing loans at lower rates. Imagine reducing your interest rate by only 1% on a long-term loan. At first, the difference appears small, but over 20 or 30 years, that single percentage point may represent thousands of dollars that remain in your pocket instead of flowing to the lender. Small improvements in credibility often create surprisingly large financial rewards. Building that credibility does not require extraordinary wealth. It requires consistency. Pay every bill before it is due. Avoid unnecessary debt. Keep credit utilization reasonable. Maintain an emergency fund whenever possible. Borrow only when the opportunity genuinely deserves financing. These habits may appear ordinary, but together, they create an extraordinary financial identity. Many successful investors understand another important principle. Never borrow because you have no alternatives. Borrow because borrowing improves an already strong financial position. There is a tremendous difference between desperation and strategy. When someone urgently needs money simply to survive, their negotiating position becomes weak. They often accept unfavorable interest rates, uncomfortable repayment schedules, strict loan conditions, not because the loan is good, but because they feel they have no choice. Strategic borrowers operate very differently. They prepare before opportunity appears. They strengthen their finances during good times. They build liquidity, protect their credit, maintain positive cash flow. Then, when an exceptional investment opportunity arrives, they are ready. Banks compete for trustworthy borrowers. That is a position worth reaching. Think of borrowing like applying for an important job. The interview begins long before you enter the room. Your resume has already spoken. Your references have already spoken. Your previous work has already spoken. Similarly, your financial history introduces you before you ever meet a loan officer. Every payment you've made, every financial commitment you've honored, every responsible decision you've repeated over time, all of it quietly speaks on your behalf. This is why successful investors protect their financial reputation so carefully. They understand that credibility compounds, just like money. One responsible year leads to another. One successful loan leads to easier financing in the future. One wise decision opens the door to larger opportunities later. Eventually, lenders stop viewing you as someone asking for money. They begin viewing you as someone capable of creating profitable investments with borrowed capital. That shift changes everything, because the easiest time to qualify for financing is often when you no longer desperately need it. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about credit is believing it exists merely to help people buy things. In reality, strong credit exists to expand future opportunities. It allows investors to move when exceptional opportunities appear. It allows entrepreneurs to grow businesses more efficiently. It allows families to make thoughtful long-term decisions instead of desperate short-term ones. Never think of your financial reputation as something that matters only when applying for a loan. Think of it as an investment, one that quietly grows every single month you honor your commitments. Because banks do not simply lend money to people with income. They lend most confidently to people who have demonstrated discipline. And in the long run, discipline is one of the most profitable assets any borrower can ever own. Chapter 8. Make debt work for you, not against you. By now, one truth should be becoming increasingly clear. Debt is neither your enemy nor your savior. It is simply a tool, like every powerful tool. Its value depends entirely on the person using it. A skilled builder can create an extraordinary home with a hammer. Someone careless can cause serious damage using the very same instrument. The hammer never changed. Only the person holding it did. Debt follows exactly the same principle. Some people spend decades blaming debt for every financial hardship they experience. Others praise borrowing as though it were a shortcut to wealth. Both perspectives miss the point. The loan itself deserves neither the credit nor the blame. The decisions made before, during, and after borrowing are what determine the outcome. Imagine two entrepreneurs launching businesses at the same time. Each borrows exactly the same amount of money. The first entrepreneur immediately spends most of the loan on appearances, a luxurious office, expensive furniture, premium decor, designer branding. The business certainly looks successful, but behind the scenes, very little of that borrowed money actually generates additional revenue. Every month, loan payments continue. Cash reserves begin shrinking. Pressure quietly builds. Now consider the second entrepreneur. They work from a modest office. They purchase only the equipment required to increase productivity. They invest in staff training, marketing with measurable returns, technology that improves efficiency. Every borrowed dollar is assigned a specific job. Every expense has a clear purpose. One business spends borrowed money, the other invests borrowed money. Within a few years, their financial futures are completely different. The difference was never the loan. The difference was the direction of the money. This is one of the greatest habits shared by successful investors. They never ask, how quickly can I spend this money? Instead, they ask, how quickly can this money begin producing more money? That question changes every financial decision, because once borrowed money begins generating cash flow, the relationship with debt begins to change. Instead of depending entirely on your paycheck, your investments begin sharing the responsibility. Eventually, your assets contribute more and more toward paying your obligations. One day, if you continue making disciplined decisions, those same assets may continue producing income long after the loan has disappeared. That is the true objective, not permanent borrowing. Permanent ownership. Borrowing should always be temporary. Asset ownership should be lasting. This distinction is incredibly important. Many people accidentally become lifelong borrowers because they continuously replace one loan with another. A car loan ends, and another begins. One credit card is paid off, only to be filled again. A mortgage is refinanced, not to improve an investment, but to finance additional consumption. Years pass, income increases, yet debt remains constant. Their financial life becomes an endless cycle of repayments. Successful investors follow a different pattern. They borrow with intention, repay with discipline, then allow the asset to continue serving them for years, sometimes decades. Debt becomes a bridge, not a permanent destination. Another principle worth remembering is that patience often produces returns that excitement never can. Modern culture celebrates speed, instant results, instant approval, instant delivery, instant gratification. We are constantly encouraged to believe that faster is always better. But wealth rarely follows that timeline. Real financial freedom is usually built quietly. One wise investment, one responsible loan, one disciplined repayment, repeated consistently over many years. Compounding does not impress anyone during the first few years. Its greatest power appears much later. That is why so many people underestimate it. Think of planting an oak tree. The early years seem almost disappointing. Growth appears slow. Progress feels invisible. But beneath the surface, roots are expanding. Strength is developing. Eventually, the tree becomes strong enough to survive storms that would destroy younger trees. Financial discipline develops in much the same way. Every responsible borrowing decision strengthens your financial foundation. Every unnecessary debt avoided protects future opportunities. Every productive asset acquired increases future cash flow. The results may not be dramatic today, but over time, they become extraordinary. It is also important to understand that financial freedom is not measured by how much money passes through your hands. It is measured by how much control you have over your life. Can you choose the work you enjoy? Can you spend time with your family without constant financial anxiety? Can you invest in opportunities instead of worrying about surviving until the next paycheck? Can your investments continue supporting your lifestyle even when you decide to slow down? These questions define wealth far more accurately than expensive possessions ever could, because true wealth creates options. Debt should never remove those options. Properly managed, it should help expand them. As we reach the end of this audiobook, remember that every chapter has pointed toward the same central idea. Borrow to acquire assets, not appearances. Borrow only what you can comfortably repay. Respect the power of leverage before using it. Turn every increase in income into greater financial freedom. Learn to distinguish productive debt from destructive debt. Protect your cash flow. Build a financial reputation that earns trust. And above all, make every borrowed dollar work harder than you do. These principles are not complicated, but they require something increasingly rare: consistency. Because wealth is almost never created by one brilliant financial decision. It is created by hundreds of disciplined decisions, made month after month, year after year. The people who ultimately achieve financial independence are not necessarily the smartest, nor are they always the highest earners. More often, they are simply the ones who understand that money is a tool, time is an asset, and debt, when managed with wisdom and discipline, debt can become a powerful partner rather than a lifelong burden. So the next time you consider borrowing, pause before signing anything. Do not ask yourself, can I get this loan? Instead, ask the question that truly matters. Will this borrowed money create a stronger financial future than the one I already have? If the answer is yes, and the numbers support your decision, move forward with confidence. If the answer is no, have the discipline to walk away. Because in the end, financial success is not determined by how much money you borrow. It is determined by how wisely you put every borrowed dollar to work. And when every dollar has a purpose, every decision has a strategy, and every investment moves you closer to freedom, you are no longer simply using debt. You are using it to build a life of lasting wealth, opportunity, and financial independence. Conclusion: the wealth you build begins with the decisions you make today. Throughout this audiobook, we have explored something that many people spend an entire lifetime misunderstanding. Not because the information is hidden, but because very few people are ever taught to look at debt from the perspective of wealth builders instead of consumers. Most people believe that borrowing money is either completely good or completely bad. Now you know the truth is far more nuanced. Debt is neither. It is simply a financial instrument, one that rewards discipline and punishes carelessness, one that magnifies wisdom just as easily as it magnifies mistakes. Everything depends on how it is used. If there is one lesson worth remembering long after this audiobook ends, let it be this: money should always have a purpose before you borrow it. Never allow borrowed money to dictate your future. Instead, give every borrowed dollar a clear assignment. Ask it to build. Ask it to grow. Ask it to create income. Ask it to strengthen your financial position. Because money without direction quickly disappears. Money with purpose has the potential to change an entire life. Think back to the principles we've covered together. Borrow to acquire productive assets, not temporary status. Borrow only what your cash flow can comfortably support. Respect leverage, but never underestimate its risks. Increase your investments before you increase your lifestyle. Recognize the difference between debt that creates opportunity and debt that quietly steals tomorrow. Protect your cash flow before chasing higher returns. Build a financial reputation that earns trust. And above all, make every financial decision with patience instead of emotion. These ideas may sound simple, yet simple does not mean easy. The greatest challenge in personal finance has never been understanding the numbers. It has always been controlling human behavior. Impulse, fear, pride, comparison, the desire to appear successful before actually becoming successful. Those emotions have destroyed more wealth than almost any market crash. Successful investors understand something that most people eventually learn the hard way. Financial freedom is not built through dramatic moments. It is built through ordinary decisions repeated consistently. Choosing to save when spending feels easier. Choosing to invest when others consume. Choosing patience when the world demands instant gratification. Choosing discipline when nobody is watching. Those choices rarely attract attention today, but years from now, they often become the reason someone else looks at your success and says, "You were lucky." What they rarely see are the thousands of quiet decisions that created that luck. Remember, every financially independent person once stood exactly where you stand today. They faced uncertainty. They questioned themselves. They worried about making the wrong decision. The difference is that they continued learning. They continued improving. And they allowed time to become their greatest financial partner. Because time rewards consistency far more generously than it rewards perfection. You do not need to make perfect financial decisions. You simply need to make better decisions more often than not and continue making them for many years. Compounding will take care of the rest. One wise investment becomes two. Two become five. Five become 10. Income becomes cash flow. Cash flow purchases additional assets. Those assets generate even more income. Eventually, the system begins working for you instead of requiring constant effort from you. That is the true destination, not borrowing forever, not working forever, but creating a financial life where your money gradually assumes more responsibility than your labor, where your investments produce choices, where your assets purchase your time, where financial decisions are made from confidence, not desperation. As you leave this audiobook, remember that every loan you ever consider presents two possible futures. One future increases financial pressure, the other increases financial freedom. The loan itself will never decide which future becomes reality. Only you can do that. So continue asking better questions. Continue improving your financial knowledge. Continue protecting your cash flow. Continue investing with patience. And whenever you borrow, borrow with a clear purpose, a carefully considered plan, and the discipline to ensure that every dollar you borrow works harder for your future than it ever works against it. Because lasting wealth is not created by how much money passes through your hands. It is created by how wisely you direct every dollar that does. Thank you for listening. And may every financial decision you make from this day forward bring you one step closer to lasting wealth, greater freedom, and a future built on wisdom rather than chance.